This week was painful. Yeah, I mean, after the first 2 weeks, I thought we knew what was going on. I thought I was going to be able to come out here and give some accurate takes. And oh my gosh, we just got punched in the nose. We have to reevaluate. We have to figure out what should the lessons learned be going into week 4. But starting off with the Bucs offense, the main storyline here is, yes, Baker Mayfield comes back down to earth. You see 163 total passing yards for Baker Mayfield this week. And a game where Mike Evans draws a very tough matchup. We had a lot of people in the live stream earlier this morning actually concerned to start Mike Evans. And I went, no. Evans is an alpha. He's going to be able to figure out this offense is rolling. They're 7-point favorites. Apparently, no, you should have listened to yourself. This was a very tough matchup for Mike Evans. He only gives you 17 receiving yards. On the other hand, Chris Godwin continues to dominate from the slot. Chris Godwin actually gives you 9 targets in this offense and is the one to come away with the receiving touchdown. Now, what's very surprising is after laying the goose egg last week, Cade Otton does come out. He actually has 8 targets, good for a 25% team target share. And according to my calculations, that means that Cade Otton is now the tight end 1 in fantasy football going. Obviously, I'm joking, but nonetheless, he definitely is a viable streamer. We may talk about him in the waiver wire video later this week. But going over to the running back room, this is the sneaky situation to monitor. We have had for 3 straight weeks now, Rachaad White as a player losing value. And it's because after week 1, Rachaad White came out and was laughably inefficient. And this was the continued trend of what we had from 2023. And week 2, Rachaad White continued to be laughably inefficient. And now in week 3, for the 3rd straight week, Bucky Irving is a better running back than Rachaad White from a per touch perspective if you were looking at the efficiency and the burst of these two backs. I tweeted this out during the game, but Rachaad White, 31 carries this year, 66 rushing yards. Bucky Irving, on the other hand, 24 carries, 145 rushing yards, and Irving actually stepped it up at the end of the game as well. So honestly, the gap between these two players is maybe even larger now. Now, in terms of, how are we valuing these two players going into the future? I'm still going to continue to move Rachaad White down my rankings over there on the site, and I'm still going to continue to move Bucky Irving up. But if we were submitting starting lineups in week 4, Rachaad White is still the starting running back of this team. Rachaad White still played 38 snaps here in comparison to Bucky Irving at 14. So I am probably starting Rachaad White as a low-end RB2 in a full PPR format because he still does have the receiving workload, right? I mean, Rachaad White did give you 6 targets out of the backfield this week. Now, with those 6 targets, he only had 18 rushing yards, continuing to do nothing with them. But when the receiving volume's there, he does give you somewhat of a floor in a PPR format. Now, let's go over to Denver. Now, before this game, we actually had the report coming out from Ian Rappaport saying the Broncos were going to emphasize the run game to take heat off of Bo Nix after Bo Nix obviously looking like a complete debacle through the first 2 weeks. Well, you maybe want to say, okay, they had 136 rushing yards. Maybe that did happen. Not really. You had 45 dropbacks for Bo Nix in this offense. And if we exclude the Bo Nix rushing attempts, you were sitting here at 19 rushing attempts to the running backs. So really, nope, Bo Nix continued to air the ball out here. Bo Nix continued to be very inefficient off of the 36 pass attempts. He only had 216 passing yards. Now, Bo Nix is flashing a little bit of rushing upside. This is Bo Nix's 2nd rushing touchdown this season. So if Nix were to somehow be able to put it together as a passer, he actually could be viable in fantasy given this rushing workload. But it looks like it's far from that with how bad Bo Nix has been so far. Going over to the running back usage, very interesting to continue to see that on 3rd down and in the 2-minute drill, it's pretty much all Javonte Williams, whereas it's definitely more of a split backfield in every other scenario, where you were looking at a total of 35 snaps played for Javonte. You had 18 played for Jaleel. And you actually have a 3rd running back getting involved here, which was the big concern that we had for Javonte Williams coming into the season. And I thought it was going to be Audric Estime. Obviously, Estime goes in the IR, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, Javonte Williams may be a little more appealing. Well, no, nobody's startable here in this offense. I mean, Greg Dulcich had a lot of targets 2 weeks ago, but Dulcich only has 10 routes run this week. Ultimately, you can't start a single Denver Bronco. If you were to look at potentially anybody here, it would be Courtland Sutton, who has 11 targets, but the offense is just so capped. Now, going over to the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is a very weird box score to try to decipher. You go back to what we saw last week. Last week, Jaylen Warren played the identical amount of snaps as Najee Harris. And it looked like Jaylen Warren, being another week removed from the hamstring injury, was causing this offense to go back to its usual 50-50 RB split between Najee and Warren. That does not happen here. And instead, Najee just takes the vast majority of this team's touches. Najee actually has 18 carries in this offense, and Najee at the same time has 5 receptions. Now, Najee Harris is going to do Najee Harris things. He's going to be very inefficient with this workload. So, I mean, off of these 23 opportunities, you're still only coming away with a total of 86 yards for Najee. No touchdown. We know that this is going to be an overall cap Pittsburgh Steelers offense where Justin Fields himself will account for a ton of these touchdowns in general. Justin Fields vultures the rushing touchdown from Najee Harris here. What's very interesting is to see the involvement of Cordell Patterson in this offense. Cordell Patterson actually comes in and he plays 23 snaps, which is the same amount as what you see from Jaylen Warren. So this actually caps Najee Harris to only playing 40 snaps out of 68, even though Warren is extremely limited. So what I would say is, if this is a 3-man running back by committee, while yes, Najee Harris definitely looks like the lead back, still, you're probably not excited to play anybody, knowing that Justin Fields himself will have a lower checkdown rate. It'll be a lower volume offense, and Justin Fields himself will steal some of these rushing touchdowns at the goal line. Now, going over to the receivers here, at Pat Freiermuth, you do see some type of life. You have 31 routes run for Freiermuth with only 6 routes run for Darnell Washington, which is really encouraging. And in terms of the receivers, George Pickens does have the majority of the targets. Pickens has 7 targets here. Calvin Austin's actually the guy with the big touchdown. But regardless, Pickens remains that borderline flex play where the primary issue is you're just never expecting Fields to come out and have 300 passing yards and multiple passing touchdowns, right? I believe the underdog pick him going into this week for Justin Fields was like higher, lower, 160 total passing yards. So yeah, it's just very difficult to project out anybody here to have that kind of volume. But if in the future you want to check out any of those picks, you can on Underdog Fantasy. The link to Underdog is actually in the description and the comment section. And here, my favorite pick for tomorrow night's game is going to be T. Higgins to have more than 45.5 receiving yards. We're actually on a heater right now. We're about up 200 to 300, depending on what happens in the Chiefs game. But yeah, main reason is Underdog's been rolling out a ton of promos pretty much every single day. And they actually have that new offer where if you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you're going to be getting a Joe Burrow free pick, more than less than half a total yard. Plus, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And you will be getting a free team review from yours truly on a live stream. So make sure you take advantage of that with the link in the comment section. But moving over to the Chargers offense, this offense was churning in the first half here. Actually, see this tweet from Brett Coleman where you had 0 yards in the second half for Los Angeles. You had some positive plays. You had some negative plays, pretty much all balancing out. But this is a team that once Justin Herbert goes down, you just simply cannot throw the ball. You have no Herbert. You have no Joshua Palmer. Last I read, Justin Herbert was actually seen wearing a walking boot, and this is going to be very concerning for a player that had a high ankle sprain coming into this game. So while I had drafted a decent amount of Quentin Johnston in Underdog Best Ball drafts, which I thought was looking pretty good at price about wide receiver 74, at this point, no longer viable if you have no Herbert. Ladd McConkey, not viable if you have no Herbert. J.K. Dobbins, we had as that sell high guy coming into this week, understanding that Dobbins had 2 very good matchups through the first 2 weeks. Schedule's about to get a little bit tougher, and at the same time, this wasn't necessarily an offense that was going to feature Dobbins as a receiver. Dobbins does have some encouraging usage. Dobbins actually has 30 snaps out of a potential 46 in this offense, which is definitely the best split that you've seen for J.K. Dobbins all season now. But yeah, I mean, if you have no Justin Herbert, just going to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL, and almost nobody is a play, including Dobbins. Now, going over to Philly, dear God, Saquon Barkley is maybe even moving up further in my rankings. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section, but I had Saquon Barkley ranked as the RB3 rest of season coming into today. I had him directly behind Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. Definitely going to be something that we are having to think about as you get a 65-yard rushing touchdown from Barkley. You get the usage at the goal line as well. With Barkley, he has 4 receptions in this game, giving you the PPR floor, and it's just a phenomenal performance top to bottom. Now, going over to Jalen Hurts himself, obviously Jalen Hurts looks very bad at points in this game. The box score at the same time isn't super encouraging. You have 0 touchdowns total, 2 an interception, and Jalen Hurts had an ugly fumble as well. So from a real life perspective, it wasn't super exciting, but you have to keep in mind the context of it. A.J. Brown was not in this game. Devonta Smith goes down pretty much right at the beginning of the second half, where I kind of know, okay, my hopes as a fantasy football player is done for today. This was just a brutal week for me. You'll see in the Flock League video, but your boy's falling to 2-1. The path to be having an undefeated season is looking like it's no longer clear. But anyway, moving over to Hurts, going into the future, when you have fully healthy Smith, when you have a fully healthy A.J. Brown, I still have no concerns. We've seen the rushing upside for Hurts. I think he's still an elite option in fantasy football. Turnovers are a definite issue in real life. And going over to the pass catchers here, even if you have no Devonta Smith, even if you have no A.J. Brown, I'm not super excited. They're going to get Paris Campbell involved. They're going to get Covey involved. They're going to get Barkley involved. They're going to get Dotson involved. There's so many other players that are touching the football. Really, the only guy they give a bump up is Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert goes from that low-end tight end 1 to all of a sudden, we know Devonta Smith and to A.J. Brown, to an elite tight end 1, where Goedert was pretty much the entire show today, 170 receiving yards, which I believe this one game means he is leading all tight ends in receiving yards this season by approximately 142. Now, going over to our next game, RIP anybody who went out here and started Rashid Shaheed. I read your comments screaming at me, put some respect on Shaheed's name. All right, calm down. With Shaheed, he is a boom-bust player. When you have the long receiving touchdowns, when you have the Saints dropping 40 points in a game, Shaheed is going to do well. If you're in an underdog best ball draft, that's something that's exciting. But these boom-bust field stretching options can be very good NFL players, while at the same time being very inconsistent for your fantasy team, and should primarily just be viewed as those flex options based off matchup. Now, going over to Olave. Olave actually is the best game so far of the year, which is really encouraging because this is the first time that we've actually seen the Saints play a close football game. You only have 142 passing yards for Derek Carr, but Olave accounts for almost 75% of these with 86 receiving yards and the only receiving touchdown in this offense. Alvin Kamara continues to show just an absolute workhorse level workload. 87 rushing yards off of 26 carries. He gives you the 3 receptions for 40 receiving yards as well. Alvin Kamara is a player that I think we have to consider moving ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs in our rankings. I'm going to consider it. Obviously, no Taysom Hill gives him the bump in this game. It's just so crazy to see this for Kamara. I mean, it's embarrassing that I had Kamara ranked as an RB2 coming into the season. Should have been smart enough to identify, Kamara was the top 5 running back last season. Kamara is the only running back in this backfield. Miller is on the IR. I guess that means Kamara is a top 10 running back yet again. Sadly, I was not smart enough to do it. Sadly, I was scared of the age, and I was just an idiot overall. So now we're having to consider, is Kamara truly a top 4 option at this point? Now, moving over to Minnesota. Well, yes, Sam Darnold looked phenomenal. I do want to put a little asterisk on this, in that while Sam Darnold had the 4 passing touchdowns, 181 passing yards off 28 pass attempts, this was a game that was dictated by the Minnesota Vikings defense, both from a real-life perspective as well as putting the Minnesota Vikings in great field position, time in and time out, to allow Sam Darnold, to allow Aaron Jones to absolutely cook Houston here. Obviously, I don't want to take anything away from Darnold, but more so giving props to the Minnesota Vikings defense. And I need to put a little clown nose on myself here, as I did not think the Vikings defense was near the top of the NFL coming into this week in terms of plays for week 3 in fantasy, despite them leading the NFL in sacks. And now we can for sure say that the Minnesota Vikings defense, for fantasy purposes, is the top 5 unit rest of season. Looking at the receivers here, obviously Jefferson remains an elite level player. Jalen Naylor gets you the touchdown, but in reality, when Jordan Addison's back in, he's going to be nothing. Really, nothing changes. Jefferson is that must-start play. Aaron Jones absolutely dominates. We get another old man in here. I know a lot of people, including myself, we were looking at the Ty Chandler usage going, okay, if we see this Minnesota Vikings offense scale back and Ty Chandler has a role here in Minnesota, what does that look like for Aaron Jones? Is he a mid to low-end RB2 at that point? And nope, not the case this week, at least. where Aaron Jones has almost 150 total yards, gets you the touchdown, has the 5 receptions as well. And yes, if you're looking at the underlying snaps, Ty Chandler still does play a bit, but if they're going to give Aaron Jones 20 plus opportunities every single week, and he's going to have the receiving usage, it honestly just doesn't matter. Now, going over to the Houston Texans side of things, I started Cam Akers this week. Not only did I start Cam Akers, but I told a lot of people in the live stream to start Cam Akers. And oh my gosh, if we did not get bailed out with the luckiest receiving touchdown ever, I probably wouldn't be making a video right now. I probably would be deleting this YouTube channel. I still end up losing my matchup anyway. That's besides the point. But anyway, Akers doesn't do anything here at all. Is it his fault? No, it's not. Like, if we're going to be realistic, this is just an offense that gets absolutely stomped on. They get boat raced. The Texans have absolutely no shot to really go out there and quote unquote establish the run at any point. They're playing from behind the entire game. You see 44 total dropbacks, actually 47 total dropbacks in this offense. Going into the future, I definitely think this will be a little bit of a different scenario in terms of the Texans running back room. I still think whoever's starting for the Texans running back room, you probably want to put them in your lineup, whether that's Akers this next week, whether it's Mixon this next week, specifically because there aren't going to be too many game environments like this for Houston. Looking at the underlying snaps for Cam Akers, he doesn't get a single third down look. He doesn't get a single look in the 2-minute drill, but that's the same thing with Joe Mixon in this offense, right? We know that role is going to be theirs regardless. But yeah, Akers in a better game environment. If you have no Pierce, if you have no Mixon, I still honestly do think is a start. You only have, JJ Taylor seeing 1 carry and British Brooks seeing 1 carry. Going over to the receivers, you have 12 targets going to Diggs. You have 10 targets going to Nico. You only have 6 going to Tank Dell. So this continues to submit that Tank Dell is the third option here in Houston. So really, there's not anything to take away from this game, at least in my mind. Going over and looking at this PFF chart, you'll see Dalton Schultz is near the very top of what we've seen throughout his entire time as a Texan in terms of his route participation and his snaps. He runs a route on 43 dropbacks, and that's right up there with Stephon Diggs at 44 and Nico Collins at 45. So yeah, in Houston, I'm probably starting Akers again next week, hoping for a better game environment if you have no Mixon and no Dameon Pierce. And Tank Dell is for sure just the wide receiver 3 here in this offense. Now going over to Indianapolis, Anthony Richardson continues to look very, very, very bad. Not only does Anthony Richardson look very bad from a real life perspective with 20 pass attempts, 2 interceptions, 0 total passing touchdowns, but at the same time, for fantasy purposes, Anthony Richardson no longer is that lock to give you some massive rushing ceiling. You have 24 rushing yards in this offense. Anthony Richardson's going to be falling down my rest of season rankings. For sure, have to put him behind somebody like Jaden Daniels at this point, who's actually giving you more rushing upside and actually has more passing volume in his respective offense. Going over to the receivers, nobody is a start considering the fact that you can't even hit 200 passing yards on average for Anthony Richardson through the first 3 weeks. Will be interesting to note that Josh Downs coming in actually does take Adonai Mitchell out of this offense pretty much entirely. And if you're looking at the total receiving yards so far in Indy, Alec Pierce is just absolutely dominating, where Michael Pittman Jr. looks like, at best, a borderline flex play. Now, going over to the Chicago Bears, I am way more embarrassed by my decision to start DeAndre Swift this week than my decision to start Cam Akers. With Swift, we should have known that this is just a garbage offensive line with a garbage offensive coordinator, and it did not matter that the Indianapolis Colts were giving up by far and away the most rushing yards of any defense in the NFL this season. It was only off a 2-game sample anyway. Who the hell am I to come out here and assume that's going to happen through the rest of the year? Besides the point, we'll talk about the running backs in a second. Caleb Williams, you have 52 pass attempts, and yes, the passing volume is immaculate. You have 363 passing yards, and you have multiple passing touchdowns. Now, does Caleb look quote-unquote good in this game? No, not really. It's a game where the adjusted yards per pass attempt extremely low. This is just volume, volume, volume. And if we knew that we were going to have this amount of volume in Chicago going into the future, then Rome Odunze is a must-start player every single week. DJ Moore is a must-start player every single week. Obviously, Rome Odunze is going to be somebody that is skyrocketing up our rankings rest of season, especially as we have no realistic timetable with Keenan Allen's return. Now, going over to what we have with tight ends, it's actually very interesting. You can see this chart from Nathan Jakey and the PFF team, where Cole Kmet plays the highest percentage of snaps by a wide margin that we have seen so far this season. Gerald Everett actually does kind of take a back seat here, where you see 40 routes run for Cole Kmet, which is out there with 56 total Caleb Williams dropbacks. So Kmet, definitely a viable tight end play if he's on your waiver wire. We'll talk about him in the waiver wire video later in the week. And going over to the running back position, we'll talk about Roschon Johnson with the waiver wire video later in the week as well. If you're looking at the snaps, Roschon plays everything in the 2-minute drill, everything on third down. Roschon has 5 targets out of the backfield. DeAndre Swift continues to be unbelievably inefficient. Like, let me go ahead and let me pull up the amount of rushing yards that you actually have for DeAndre Swift this season off his workload, because I have to imagine that this is one of the worst marks in the entire NFL. So DeAndre Swift so far this season has 37 carries for 68 rushing yards. Looking at this tweet from Nathan Jenke, you actually have 1 rushing first down picked up from DeAndre Swift, and that's off of 37 rush attempts. Obviously, the offensive line looks bad. This entire offense looks bad, but DeAndre Swift at this point is for sure in play to get benched. And another reason why Roschon is that valuable pick, even though he was absolutely nothing through the first 2 weeks, is Travis Homer did go over to the IR, which opens up that role for Roschon to be the third down back. Now, going over to the Tennessee Titans, we were saying to sell high on Tony Pollard, primarily because I thought Tajay Spears was going to come in and have the third down role. Plus, it's just a very bad offense in general. Well, Pollard face plants, but it's not because Spears has the third down role. It's not because Spears has the 2-minute drill role like we saw in week 1. You actually see just a normal split where Spears has some of the work in early downs. Pollard has the majority of it. Spears has some work on third downs. Pollard has about half of it. So it's not like we're sitting here going, oh yeah, we were right about Pollard. No, I mean, I was right about Pollard for the wrong reasons. Spears doesn't look viable here either, even if Spears does have the 54 receiving yards out of the backfield. It's just a premium handcuff back at this point. Like, if Spears were to get injured, Pollard's a must-start player. If Pollard were to get injured, Spears is a must-start player. But as of now, they're in a committee and one of the worst offenses in the NFL. DeAndre Hopkins, if you're looking at the box score, looks great. DeAndre Hopkins comes out, gives you the receiving touchdown off of 6 receptions and 73 receiving yards. But looking at this data from PFF, you'll see that Hopkins actually only plays 25 snaps in comparison to a potential 54. So it's not like Hopkins is an every down player. I'm definitely not planning on starting DeAndre Hopkins going into the future. But with this little wide receiver rotation that they have, I will definitely say it's not like Calvin Ridley can be viewed as a must-start guy anytime soon. Now, going over to what we have in Green Bay. Here, I owe you an apology where I thought no Packers receiver was even close to being viable. If you had looked at the underdog picks for this game, they had Malik Willis, higher, lower, 140 passing yards. We were operating under the assumption, okay, they're going to run the ball over and over and over again. Malik Willis actually has 202 passing yards, which in years past, that'd be garbage. And this year, it makes him one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But you have 67 receiving yards for Christian Watson. You have 50 receiving yards for Jaden Reed. Definitely once Jordan Love is back, I think these are the 2 receivers that you are going to want here. Jaden Reed being the wide receiver 1, seeing the 6 targets. But going over to the running back room, what's very interesting is the usage that you had for Emmanuel Wilson. So Marshawn Lloyd goes on the IR, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's great for Josh Jacobs. Jacobs going to continue to see everything. Emmanuel Wilson has 12 carries. He's pretty efficient with them, has 50 rushing yards. And he has both targets out of the backfield for 35 receiving yards and the receiving touchdown. So Emmanuel Wilson at this point is really the only other back in this offense outside of Josh Jacobs. And for sure viewed in my mind as a premium handcuff back if Jacobs were to go down. Because once Jordan Love's back in, it's a good offense and Wilson should have a receiving role. Now going over to Cleveland's, Deshaun Watson looks like absolute garbage this game. I mean, pretty much through the entire middle portion of the game outside of the first Amari Cooper touchdown, this is a team that cannot move the ball down the field. Now, Amari, on the other hand, absolutely dominates, makes me wish he was on my squad, but that's besides the point. And here, you're sitting with 12 targets out of 35 pass attempts in this offense. It's the continued story where Amari Cooper is the target hog. Here, the efficiency swings in the other direction, where previously he was very inefficient. This week, this is phenomenal. He gets you both receiving touchdowns, 7 receptions, 86 receiving yards. That's why we ranked Amari Cooper as a must-start guy this week, primarily because the volume had been there. Jerry Jeudy still has 7 targets in this offense, so Jerry Jeudy's still worth the roster spot for sure. And if you're looking at the running back involvement, you actually have the vast majority of snaps being played by Jerome Ford, and Ford does have a decent little receiving role. But the reason for this is the Cleveland Browns trail this entire game. So, of course, with the Cleveland Browns trailing this entire game, Ford will be the guy, not Deonta Foreman. And I do want to stand by. Ford has the receiving role. He has the receptions in this offense. So obviously, he's the more valuable player in fantasy, but both should be rostered. Now, going over to the Giant side of things, dear God, Malik Neighbors looks like he was worth that second-round pick in Underdog drafts. Malik Neighbors, despite Daniel Jones continuing to be very inefficient with only 236 passing yards off of the 34 pass attempts, you have 12 targets for Neighbors, yet again accounting for over a third of this offense here in New York. You have 78 receiving yards, multiple receiving touchdowns, including one of, if not the best grabs of the week. We had Malik Neighbors ranked as the wide receiver 13 in our rest of season rankings over there on the site going into this week. Honestly, now I think we probably need to be bumping Malik Neighbors up to wide receiver 9-ish. For sure he goes ahead of Brandon Ayuk. We will talk about Ayuk later in the video. In terms of the running back usage, freaking Devin Singletary. I had to play against him this week. It absolutely sucked. This was a game that the Giants only had a 16-point implied team total. The Browns defense was supposed to smoke this Giants offense. Clearly, that did not happen here. You get pretty much every single snap for Devin Singletary. Tyron Tracy definitely has some carries here, but Singletary is a 3-down back. I don't think he's a good running back. I don't think it's a good offense. But when the offense is able to pick up first downs and move the ball down the field, obviously Singletary will have value. Now let's go over to what put the nail in the coffin for my week. Let's go over to this Detroit Lions, Arizona Cardinals game. Freaking horrible here. Horrible. Starting off with Arizona, you have 34 pass attempts for Kyler. You get the 207 passing yards, only 1 passing touchdown. Now, the vast majority of this volume does go in the direction of Marvin Harrison Jr., where Harrison does give you actually 11 targets in this offense, which obviously is extremely compelling. You have 9 targets going over to Michael Wilson. You have 6 targets going over to Greg Dortch. Trey McBride gets banged up here. Now, this is going to be a big thing where if McBride is down, it's actually going to bump the target percentage that you're going to see going over in the direction of these secondary receivers, while at the same time maybe giving a little more juice to Marvin Harrison Jr. and negatively impacting Kyler Murray. Now, looking at the running backs in this backfield, this is what killed me. I played James Conner. It's just such a tough spot going up against the Detroit Lions rush defense. We should have given them more credit going into the week. James Conner doesn't have the receiving workload to save you off of the horrible efficiency on the grounds. I think Conner will be better going into the future, but I think this is primarily a warning for us and pretty much everybody that, yeah, you're not super excited to play a running back against the Detroit Lions defense, even if the total in that game is supposed to be extremely high. Now, going over to the Lions side of things, starting off with the running backs, pretty much it's an even split between Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. When the Lions get out to that early lead and they're able to run the ball over and over again behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, there'll be plenty of points to go around for both Montgomery and Gibbs. Gibbs gets you the receiving touchdown, if you want to call it. He doesn't even log a reception here. It's that little just lateral. I don't even know what you want to call it. It's like hook and ladder, something like that. But nonetheless, he gets you the additional 20 yards, gets you the receiving touchdown in that area. So both running backs go over 100 total yards. Both running backs had touchdowns. I would have liked a few more receptions going over to Jahmyr Gibbs as a side note. Looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown just continues to demonstrate he's a top 5 receiver in fantasy. Week in, week out, a continued 30% team target share. Going over to Sam Laporta. Laporta is officially falling down my rankings, and it sucks. One of the biggest L's that I have to take this year, and I'm willing to take this L right now. I wasn't going to do it through the first 2 weeks, but we're doing it now, is despite Sam Laporta dealing with a hamstring injury before the season started, I continue to think that Sam Laporta was a great value in round 4 of Underdog drafts, and I was very happy to take Sam Laporta in round 4 of the Flock League. I've continued to rank Sam Laporta as that top 5 tight ends. Now Sam Laporta is dealing with a sprained ankle. Laporta has just been horrendous. I won the first 2 weeks despite of him. Now this past week, I'm losing with him as one of the many reasons. I have Laporta. I'm going to have to go to the waiver wire and figure out a tight end. Maybe I pick up Cole Kmet. We'll see, but I don't know if we can play Laporta this week because due to the injury, and also it's just so gross only getting 2 targets. He only had 3 targets last week at 55 Jared Goff pass attempts. And then Jamison Williams, you see this come down dramatically. I mean, the top comment on our wide receiver rankings video was, you're disrespecting Jamison. The thing is, yes, Jamison's going to look good in these massive spike weeks, right? He's the field stretching option. He's so damn good for the Detroit Lions because he can create space underneath, allow these running backs to dominate, allow Amon-Ra St. Brown to have a ton of space, while at the same time, he's not necessarily going to be that consistent option in fantasy. Jamison gets you 1 reception for 9 receiving yards. Am I really going to be moving the ranking of Jamison Williams that much in our rankings this week? Not really. He's the same guy he always was. If you were getting a little too excited about his past week performance off of 55 Jared Goff pass attempts, maybe should be a little more realistic going into the future. Now let's go over to what we have in Seattle. So one of the other horrible calls, a mini that I had this week, is I freaking benched Brock Purdy to play Geno Smith, thinking that Purdy was going to struggle with no Debo, no Kittle. Thanks, Jawan. But anyway, Geno Smith doesn't really look great in this game. They get out to a big bleed. Obviously, you don't have to do much as an offense when you're going up against the Miami Dolphins with no Tua. Zach Charbonnet continues to demonstrate that he is a must-start running back in any week that you have no Kenneth Walker. Charbonnet plays 54 snaps here. He sees a total of 18 carries. He sees a total of 4 targets out of the backfield. One of the safest running back ones that you can project any given week. Continue to start Zach Charbonnet every week that Walker misses, but Walker may be back this week. Going over to the receivers here, DK Metcalf actually has the 71-yard receiving touchdown, absolutely crushing it off of very limited volume. You actually only have 6 targets for DK Metcalf out of 34 Geno Smith pass attempts. I mean, I don't necessarily know if this efficiency can continue. We said it after last week that I thought, honestly, it may have been an interesting spot to sell high on Metcalf. I'm honestly maybe going to reiterate that just because there are so many players seeing targets in this offense. I don't know if we can consistently rely upon the 71-yard receiving touchdowns. Going over to Tyler Lockett. Lockett actually leads this team in targets with 8. So Lockett's not dead yet in this offense. Jackson Smith-Njigba only has 3 targets. But if you look at this chart from PFF, you'll actually see that JSN yet again breaks his previous career high, which was last week, in terms of his snaps in this offense. He's broken it for 3 weeks straight yet. Now they're getting him more and more and more involved. JSN's not moving down my rankings after this week. I still view him as that wide receiver 3. That's that flex play. Noah Fant obviously looks very compelling if you're just checking out the box score, but looking at the snaps from PFF, Noah Fant actually only runs a route on 22 dropbacks out of 37. So it's not like Noah Fant's that guaranteed locked and loaded starter every week. Now going over to Miami. Here it is a war zone. Nobody is safe. This is a disaster. This is what we talked about this past week when we talked about selling HN high and pivoting to Amon-Ra St. Brown, pivoting to Justin Jefferson. And apparently I had fallen off. Apparently I was trying to get too hot takey. The thing is, if you're looking at sportsbooks and they're telling you an offense simply cannot move the ball down the field with Skylar Thompson under center. I mean, with Tim Boyle under center, they have to bring in somebody else at this point. There's no way they go into this next week with Tim Boyle. They're not, it doesn't matter if HN's their only weapon. It doesn't matter if, I mean, this is the only way they can move the ball down the field. If you can't pick up first downs, if you can't have trips to the red zone, nobody is viable. I still think you start HN every single week, especially if you have no Raheem Mostert, because the usage in the receiving game gives him that type of floor. But if when Mostert comes back in, it's going to be even a little bit scarier. I still stand by. I think HN's that low-end RB1, despite this being a garbage offense, because he's extremely, extremely talented. All I say is, if you can sell him for Jefferson, if you can sell him for St. Brown, you go ahead and do it. Looking over at the receivers, Tyreek gives you the 40 receiving yards. Kind of get lucky to get that, to be honest. Jalen Waddle, we benched this week in favor of Cam Akers. Doesn't help us win the week. I mean, Waddle looks horrible. Definitely not starting Jalen Waddle this next week. Yeah, I think Waddle's not somebody you can consider starting. Tyreek, you start, hope for a big play. HN, you start, but really this is just one of the worst offenses in the NFL until we see something change. Now, we saw something change in Carolina. We saw a big thing change in Carolina, and this is somewhere that I need to take a massive L. I am sorry if I told you to bench Deontay Johnson this week. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm not perfect. I am human, and I did not expect Andy Dalton to come out and be the only quarterback so far this season in a game with over 300 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. Did not expect that to happen. And here, when that does, Deontay Johnson absolutely dominates. 14 targets, 122 receiving yards, 8 receptions, and the receiving touchdown. If this projects out to be an average to above average NFL offense going into the future, obviously Deontay Johnson is going to be that must-start guy every single week for you. Now, do I expect this to be a team that consistently has over 300 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns? No, probably not. I'm going over to the running back room. This is actually very interesting to see the usage between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. Another spot I need to take a massive L on is I was looking at it going, oh, it's a bad offense where they're splitting backfield touches. Well, this week, Chuba Hubbard gives you 26 opportunities in comparison to Miles Sanders with a total of 9. So they're getting Chuba Hubbard more and more work in this offense. This offense is improving. So Hubbard looks like he is a play as well. It's just absolutely crazy. And then obviously you do have an injury to Adam Thielen, where Thielen, I stand by, I honestly don't even think Adam Thielen's that interesting of a play. While healthy, he only had 5 targets this game. Now, of course, he gets injured, so maybe he could have picked up a few more. But when you have so many other players touching the football, when we have natural regression for this offense, Thielen's definitely worth a roster spot at this point, but somebody that we would start in the future, probably not. But going over to what we have with the Raiders. I thought the Raiders are going to be winning this game. Apparently not. The Raiders are so bad, or at least Gardner Minshew ends up getting benched here for Aiden O'Connell. It doesn't look that much better. This is a game where they yet again kind of have to abandon the run. You get a total of 40 pass attempts, and a total of 43 dropbacks here in Las Vegas to 13 carries for the running backs. So in the Raiders trail, they will completely abandon the run. When they completely abandon the run, Zamir White is absolutely nothing. Zamir White effectively gets a total of 14 snaps after dominating snaps in week 2. I'm not saying Zamir White's cuttable, but with one more week of this, Zamir White may be cuttable. Going over to Devontae Adams. Adams sees 9 targets, but so does Trey Tucker. So does Jacoby Myers. Brock Bowers comes back down to earth just a bit. I still probably keep Bowers about where we have him in our rest of season rankings, around tight end 4. I'd probably still keep Devontae Adams because nothing really has changed here in Las Vegas. The expectation was this is a garbage offense coming into the week, and coming out of the week, it is a garbage offense. Now going over to the Dallas Cowboys Baltimore Ravens game. What was interesting is the fact that this is the 3rd straight week where the Dallas Cowboys play in a blowout. We have yet to see what the overall running back usage would look like in a close game here for Dallas. Rico Dowdle definitely had the majority of the work at the very beginning, but by the time you got to the end, everything just gets thrown out of the window. If we're looking at the target distribution, you have 51 Dak Prescott pass attempts, right? So, everybody here is going to see targets. You have 11 for Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson leads this team in receiving. Ferguson for sure looks like a borderline top 5 tight end rest of season. CeeDee Lamb sees 7 targets. I still think CeeDee Lamb's an elite wide receiver 1. I think this is just a really tough game for him. Brandon Cooks has 6 targets, does nothing with them. Jalen Tolbert has 5 targets, gets you the receiving touchdown. But in reality, Lamb, Ferguson are the only guys that you can play. I obviously don't want to play Dak Prescott either. I know Dak Prescott comes away with 3 total touchdowns, including the rushing touchdown in this game. But honestly, I don't know if that's projectable going into the future. And then going over to the Baltimore Ravens side of this, you were looking at Lamar Jackson with the rushing touchdown, with 87 rushing yards. Derrick Henry absolutely dominates in a Baltimore Ravens blowout. This is the game environment that you would want for Derrick Henry. Now, I'm not a big Derrick Henry guy. The reason being is, I've heard me say it 1,000 times. I'll have to say it when he does well, of course. If I'm going to say it when he does bad, declined for 3 straight seasons, will not catch the ball, and will be 31 in January. But Derrick Henry gives you the 25 carries, 151 rushing yards, and multiple rushing touchdowns. Looks phenomenal. Justice Hill really doesn't have that much work here, which is interesting. Derrick Henry is just the full down feature back. I think any game that Baltimore is going to blow another team out, Henry looks to be that top 10 running back in fantasy, regardless of if it's a full PPR format or not. Zay Flowers doesn't really do anything. Mark Andrews doesn't do literally anything. Isaiah Likely doesn't do literally anything. There's no passing volume in this offense. And the little passing volume there is does not go to the actual players that you'd expect. So I'm not really moving Flowers down my rankings. He was already a wide receiver 3 for me to begin with. But the Baltimore tight ends for sure have to move down. Like, I am moving Jake Ferguson ahead of these Baltimore tight ends rest of season. Going over to the Niners game. I am very sorry for saying that Brandon Ayuk was a wide receiver 1 this week. I went, okay, you have no Debo. You have no Kittle. You have no McCaffrey. This projects out to be a very good offense according to sportsbooks. I guess that means the guy who just got paid $120 million is going to do well in fantasy. What I did not take into account was the fact that I'm an idiot and I clearly know nothing. And Juwan Jennings is going to drop 3 touchdowns, 11 receptions, 175 receiving yards on the head of the Los Angeles Rams. And it's going to make it look like the Niners are winning this game easily. We'll talk about what the Rams just did. But Juwan Jennings this next week, obviously it is so difficult to rank a player after a performance like this, coming from a waiver wire option to all of a sudden being the number 1 player in fantasy for that week. Running back, it's a little bit easier to rank them because opportunity is stickier. But Juwan Jennings is definitely a must-start guy at the very minimum. The question is, do you rank him as a wide receiver 1 or a high-end wide receiver 2? Looking at Jordan Mason actually does not have everything in this backfield. Isaac Guerrero actually sneaks himself in here some work. Obviously, Kyle Juszczyk's going to get the reception anyway. But yeah, the entire story is Juwan Jennings just dominating over Brandon Ayuk. And then going over to the Los Angeles Rams, I don't know. Matthew Stafford is a wizard. Sean McVay is a wizard. 5 offensive linemen on the injured reserve. No Puka. No Cup. Obviously, Kyron must-start guy based off workload, but I was even worried about Kyron Williams. I was saying pivot off Kyron, go get Jonathan Taylor if you can. Obviously, the receivers here, you can't really start anybody until you actually see them produce. Incredible what the Rams were able to do with this comeback. In my mind, McVay's the best coach in the NFL. He is. Kyron Williams says, I don't give a damn how bad this offensive line is. I'm going to have 3 touchdowns off of 116 total yards and 26 opportunities. I'll have everything in this backfield. I don't even know what the name Blake Corum is. Just incredible by the Rams. I don't know if they can keep this up, but yeah, obviously it does make it where if they don't fall to 0-3, all of a sudden they are a little more incentivized to bring Cup back in. They are a little more incentivized to rush Puka back from their respective injuries. Phenomenal win for the Rams. Kyron cements himself. He's going to be a top 10 running back regardless. Obviously, he was already top 10. He may be a top 5 running back regardless. And yeah, I still stand by. I don't think any of the receivers here in Los Angeles are interesting until we see otherwise. But I think that's all I have for you. I really hope that you were able to come away with the dub this week. Sadly, I was not. And please go to the comment section and let me know, what do you need Monday night to actually come away with this win? If you're watching this with the premiere, just literally rewind to the beginning, talk about all the teams. And if you wanted to check out my favorite pick for Monday night, that is going to be T. Higgins to have more than 45.5 receiving yards against Washington. Love the matchup. You can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description and comment section. Promo code FLOCK will give you that 50% deposit bonus, a Joe Burrow special pick, more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, you are going to be getting a free team review from yours truly in one of the live streams that we are hosting every night. But thank you. Really do appreciate you. And really hope we get to see you in the live stream tomorrow.